what we're finding in personal finance actually is a lot of what we talk about is expert opinion, so that makes it a little bit difficult. But in general, for financial information, my bottom line is you need to see if someone's trying to sell you something or if they're just transmitting information.
Financial literacy is defined as the ability to use knowledge and skills to manage financial resources effectively for a lifetime of financial well-being. However, a number of key terms, including financial literacy, make up what's known as a personal finance ecosystem. There's also financial education, financial capability, financial information and tools, behavioral influencers, and idiosyncratic factors. On today's Sound Living, improving financial well-being. Sound Living is a weekly public affairs program produced by Research and Extension at Kansas State University. I'm Jeff Wichman. K-State Research and Extension Family Resource Management Specialist Elizabeth Kish explains the personal finance ecosystem and how it can help us better understand and improve our financial well-being. Elizabeth, I like the fact that they refer to personal finance as an ecosystem because it really is. There are a lot of moving parts and a lot of things that go into not only finances, but financial literacy and financial education.
That's right. And the National Endowment for Financial Education has really been a thought leader in helping the field to think about where we fit as financial educators and what it is that actually influences the outcomes that we're looking for. For example, is it a straight line from financial education to financial well-being, which is really kind of the goal of what we're trying to get people to do? And most of us think that it's not a straight line.
Well, I think it's most definitely not when you look at some of the things that go into it when they start talking about the financial education component, financial capability, and then there's all the information and tools. So let's just kind of walk through some of the things that maybe would help people to better understand where to find information and then the type of information they should be looking for.
Okay, so let's start with some definitions. We all have to be on the same page. So if we think about financial education at any level, it could be in the school, it could be as an adult learner. It's what we call a systematic approach to cultivating financial knowledge and financial decision-making skills. So it's systematic. It's not just sort of random. You're not just kind of picking it up willy-nilly. You're cultivating or you're building financial knowledge and decision-making skills because, again, the knowledge by itself is not enough to translate probably into action.
So when we're talking about that, then we're looking at different types of objectives. What are we trying to learn?
Yeah. So with the financial knowledge and the financial education piece, there really are, just like any other type of education, there are best practices for what makes effective education. And we also know how learners can best then incorporate that knowledge into action. We also know that there are some other sort of intervening factors, intervening realities, shall we say, that are between the financial education and financial capability. And if we talk about financial capability, that is really the individual's ability to act on their own in their own best interest. So they understand how to do it and they understand what's best for them. Again, you've got the knowledge and the financial knowledge and the decision-making skills, but you also have general skills and abilities because some of this is translatable across many parts of our lives, or the many parts of our lives relate to our financial lives. And then there's also external factors, which are economic conditions. If you're unemployed, you may have all the knowledge in the world, but you can't act on it because you have some limitations of income or other resources probably. Also, financial products and services, if you don't have access or know how to access the appropriate financial products and services for your situation, then that's an external factor that will be in the middle of what you know and what you're able to do. We have family factors that also affect this movement from education to capability or what we're actually doing.
Also, when we go back to the general skills and abilities, some of this becomes, I think, a little bit intimidating because we start working with numbers, we have a lot of critical thinking that goes on, and sometimes that can be intimidating for anybody.
Right. So there's one school of thought that, people just need to do math. It's just addition, subtraction, calculating interest would involve multiplication and division. But, it's just basic math. And if you know the basic math, you should be able to do it. And why aren't you then accumulating wealth, right? Another more nuanced school of thought is that the math and those skills are important, but you also have to understand people's motivations. You have to understand their values and their goals. In order to achieve something, most people need to be able to either visualize it or really be strongly motivated to achieve it. Or they develop the habits at some point in their life that then it just becomes sort of automatic. There's an emerging discussion about the role of habits in some of these behaviors. So, for example, I know that I should save for an emergency fund, our favorite example, right? It's not necessarily going to get me emotionally excited to save for an emergency fund. I do think about, well, if I don't have this money in the bank, my options are to use credit or to borrow from friends and family or something like that, which, depending on the amount of the emergency, I might still have to do. But then this habit is, if I decide my goal is to save for my emergency fund and I'm going to save $40 a month every month and I'm going to transfer the money myself, it becomes a habit, right? And then it's not a goal I'm necessarily like jumping for joy, excited about, like saving for vacation or something. But yet the habit sort of sees me through and gets me into what would be considered financial capability in some ways because I'm acting on my own in my own self-interest.
I think you're kind of talking about the idiosyncratic factors.
Yeah, it's factors that in motivation, your cognitive biases, which are sort of the way you think, what might limit you or might be protective factors. Definitely your values, your beliefs and attitudes, your risk tolerance. So risk tolerance is now sort of the things that keep you up at night is one way I look at it. If you're really bothered because you have a large credit card bill or you're not sure what's going to happen if you get a flat tire or how are you going to deal with something, that's kind of your level of risk tolerance. But in the financial world, a lot of it has to do with future events. So if you think about, are you prepared for retirement? Although it's not a great example because most Americans are not prepared, so it would seem like we have a pretty high level of risk tolerance. But those kind of things also, those are our internal idiosyncratic. That means there's no systematic way to describe it, so it's individual.
You also mentioned the behavioral influencers, and some of that is maybe just getting that nudge you were talking about where you think you should plan for an emergency, but you kind of put it off. Maybe once you have that emergency, you're much more likely then to think, okay, that's it. I really need to start planning.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I had a conversation with a colleague in another state last week, and we were talking about emergency preparedness. And her position was, do people really prepare for emergencies, or are they more likely to prepare after they've already experienced an emergency and then they understand? And, I think part of that is the risk tolerance, too, is how much risk are you willing to plan for and prepare for? So that's why we buy insurance, right? With insurance, we talk about, or any risk planning, some risks you want to avoid altogether. Some of them you're willing to accept, but you want to minimize. And then others you want to transfer. And so we transfer risk by buying insurance. So we pay the premiums, we have a deductible, but the greatest part of the risk we've transferred to the insurance company. So I think with the nudges, the choice architecture, as it's called, or these systems that we might put in place to manage risk or to plan for the future are those behavioral influencers.
So if we're trying to, increase our financial well-being, our financial education, our financial knowledge, what's the best way to go about doing that? How do we know that the information we're getting is really, as we say in extension, research-based? How do we know that this is good, solid information?
Right. So, and it can be research-based. There's another term, evidence-based. Expert opinion may be okay. What we're finding in personal finance actually is a lot of what we talk about is expert opinion, so that makes it a little bit difficult. But in general, for financial information, my bottom line is you need to see if someone's trying to sell you something or if they're just transmitting information, which doesn't mean just because someone's trying to sell you something it's necessarily bad, but you should, I feel, have your eyes wide open, be aware that they may be trying to sell you something. They may be benefiting from some action that you might take. If you want to take that action, if after you've evaluated it, that's fine. But I think let's go back and think about, you mentioned financial well-being. That's one term that we didn't actually define yet, but that is the goal of the financial education, the financial capability. I mean, that's what we're going for, right? Just like we want people to be healthy and well in a lot of domains we've talked about before. Financial well-being is one of those domains. And so it can be personal economic outcomes. So what is our, through objective measures, what is our income? Where do we fall? What is our credit score? But it's also subjective, which means what do we feel within ourselves? So what is our perception of how we're doing? Can we accurately predict, for example, what our credit score is and what it means? I talk to students sometimes and we talk about grade point averages and they say, oh, I'm doing great. I have a 2 point out of 4, right? And so
my kind of student.
Yeah, exactly. And everyone has a different grade point average, but so it is part of perception. And certainly you're passing with a 2.0, but it's not a B average at a 3 or an all A average at a 4 or someplace in between. So it's kind of like this perception of, can you be accurate? And I think, when we think about the perception and preparedness for retirement, for example, that really comes into it, the financial well-being. People just don't have an understanding of how much it will likely cost. And granted, that's usually a big number, it turns people off. I totally get it. It's very intimidating. So we have the personal economic outcomes, objective measures. Then we have the subjective measures, which are internal, how do I feel? But then we also have, are you satisfied? Are you okay with this? I think, by the time most of us hit our 40s to 50s, we realize unless we started really early saving and investing or something happens, we're probably not going to be whatever we thought we might be. If you were really sporty when you were young, you're probably not going to be a professional athlete. You're probably not going to be some of these things that we might have thought we aspired to when we were younger. But are we satisfied with that? Are we okay with that? We understand kind of where we are, and that's okay. Maybe we may still be striving, but it might be realistic striving. And then when we think about financial well-being, it's also the decisions and the behaviors, because it's, again, are we able to act in our own best interest?
I also see a lot of financial literacy questions like, how financial literate are you? And I always kind of think that we might know something, but if we don't ever put it into practice, like you were saying, that's where the disconnect comes. Sometimes we think we understand finances, but maybe we need to go back to the basics and just kind of start at step 1 and walk ourselves through it. And Extension has some publications that can really do that. They've got the basics, and then they've got a little bit more advanced information if you need that.
Right. So we have actually a series of fact sheets and educational materials called Essential Living Skills, which cover really all of those domains of well-being, including financial well-being. And so that would be really basic. We're talking about financial education, but in my field of family resource management, it's also time and skills, right? And so I think one of the very best pieces of the Essential Living Skills is there's a series of resources about time and how we deal with time, how we look at it, how we use time. There is the financial one. We have some very specific resources related to credit, also spending plans, otherwise known as budgets, which challenge people to really think about what are their values and goals, but also put into context sort of this subjective perception of where you fit. Thinking about, we have these sort of external rules of thumb about different aspects of money management. And so in that fact sheet, we really talk about, okay, so these might be the external sort of the messages that we may have gotten along the way. But, are people doing these things or are they not? And what it comes down to then is that as individuals, we can create our own rule of thumb, which may become a habit, which is then these behavioral influencers.
That's K-State Research and Extension Family Resource Management Specialist Elizabeth Kish. More information on personal finance is available at county and district extension offices and on the Extension website, www.ksre.ksu.edu. And for more information on the National Endowment for Financial Education's framework for defining the personal finance ecosystem, visit nefe.org. Sound Living is a weekly public affairs program produced by Research and Extension at Kansas State University. I'm Jeff Wichman, and this is the K-State Radio Network.